And for more, we're joined by Irfan Nooruddin, Professor of Indian Politics from the Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Professor, the full red carpet treatment for Prime Minister Modi, Biden has said, and I have a quote here, he said that the challenges and opportunities facing the world in this century require that India and the US work and lead together. Now, those are some nice words, but the flurry of deals suggests there is action that will back them up.
There is a lot of announcements being made. I mean, the reality, of course, will be whether in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, the announcements have gained traction on the ground, whether we actually see jobs being created in India because of new supply chains that are being built in critical and emerging technologies with the United States, whether the defense partnership really grows in the way that both leaders have demonstrated an aspiration for. But all of that action starts with commitments, and the commitments that are being announced today and will continue to be announced over the course of the next couple of days suggests that both countries are serious about a multidimensional cooperation. So it's not just defense, it's not just trade, but it's in technology, it's in education, it's in healthcare. They're talking about sending an Indian astronaut to the International Space Station, so there's space level cooperation. And critically, there's a real emphasis on climate and on the climate transition. The United States recognizes that for the world's climate goals, India has to be a partner. India has made it very clear that it can't get there without a lot of technical and financial support. And so there's a lot of room for cooperation. And so far, the announcement suggests that both sides have been working very hard to make serious announcements.
Mm-hmm. And Professor, some experts do caution, though, that it may look as if India is pivoting to the U.S., but it will never be Washington's ally, and that it'll manage the relationship on its own terms. Do they have a point here? And if so, how should the U.S. effectively manage India's, should I say, ambivalence?
The United States has got a new partner in India, and I don't think it has a category in which to fit it. The United States likes to think of the world as either being with us or against us, right? A very simplistic sort of cowboys and bad guys kind of mentality, if I'm going to simplify things. And India doesn't play by those rules. It never has. Once upon a time, it was a very principled stance against what it saw as the polarization of the Cold War. They refer to it as non-alignment. Today, it's different. It's much more transactional. It's much more realpolitik. They refer to it today as multi-alignment. The External Affairs Minister has made clear that India's strategic autonomy is critical and imperative. It's not going to be compromised. And so for the United States, what does that actually mean? It means that India is going to cooperate when it's in India's interest or self-understood interest to do that, but it's unlikely to do things that the United States wants simply because the United States wants it. The US has found this out the hard way, as has the rest of the West, when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine. I think it was a real surprise to many in Washington that India simply didn't fall in line to condemn Russia, join the sanctions regime, and in fact took a lot of actions that many in Washington think undermine the sanctions, continuing to buy Russian oil, for instance. You're going to see more of that. And I think there's a big question mark in Washington, within the intelligence, within the security and strategy community, about whether or not everything that the United States hopes India will do will actually ever be delivered. But in the short run, the economic cooperation is real, the trade cooperation is real. But on China, it's a really big question. And I think important, hard questions have to continue to be asked as to whether India can truly be the partner America wants it to be. Of course, India doesn't owe America that, but if America is really giving all these goodies because it wants that, then I think there's going to be a reckoning at some point.
And do you think that's a big shift then that Washington will have to face, that it needs to see, if it doesn't perhaps already see India on equal footing?
I think that's absolutely right. What do you do with a country that has had long-standing partnerships, that values the relationship with Russia, right? That actually is still awaiting the delivery of a massive military system developed by the Russians, that still has a great amount of its military hardware made by the Russians, systems that are completely incompatible with the United States. Now, on the one hand, what we're seeing today and tomorrow is that the United States is beginning the work of offering technology transfer, co-production. All of that should be understood as weaning India or trying to wean India away from its traditional partner of Russia. But India's economy, much like the rest of Asia's, and indeed much like the United States, is also extremely dependent on China's economy. It is, it imports tremendous amount of raw material and production supplies from China. Indian businesses see China's market as an export destination. If at some point in some, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, the United States wanted to announce sanctions against China, why would it expect that India would join those sanctions? If there was kinetic military action with China over, say, Taiwan, what would be the expectation about India's participation in such a conflict? And I think a lot of strategists in Washington are counseling the government to say, hey, you can want a lot of those things, but the India's track record, its historical record, and its current posture suggests that caution and maybe some humility is in order.
And Professor, so how will Mr. Modi's trip be viewed by both China and Russia? And has India's balancing act gotten more challenging?
Russia, I think, is fairly simple. Russia sees this as an enduring partnership, and the actions that India has made of buying Russian oil, continuing to trade with Russia, they were exploring alternative trading currency arrangement, rubles for rupees, as opposed to going through dollar-denominated exchanges, right? So I think Russia is not insecure over there. For China, I think this is not a wake-up call. China is aware of the slow movement of India towards the United States, but I think it does force a new reality that says you have to think about a Western strategy, and what we might expect, for instance, is for China to double down on its relationship with India's neighbor and long-term rival, Pakistan. Does China begin to make further inroads in Bangladesh? Does it try and build out better relationships once again with Sri Lanka? All of those would have the effect of slowly encircling India, but also giving the United States a lot to think about how to counter Chinese influence in Central Asia and increasingly in the Middle East as well. So what bringing India into the US orbit, or this tighter defining relationship as the leaders refer to it, raises the calculus for China and potentially raises the stakes in Western South Asia. And both of those together, given that we're talking about many countries that have nuclear weapons, means that the tensions are going to increase. So I think we're going to have to see a lot of diplomacy, not just at the US-China level and the US-India level, but indeed at the India-China level, so that together we can diffuse some of those tensions while doing a lot of the cooperation that the world needs.
And thank you for your insight this morning, Professor. We'll have to leave it there for now. Irfan Nooruddin, Professor of Indian Politics at Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University.